Anatomy lesson. Anya arrived with the boys right on schedule. Helen had convinced Alistair to take Ben and Jason for some quality boy time on Angus's boat. They wouldn't be back until after dark. Dawn was in her bedroom, chilling out with her iPod. Helen had forsaken her usual shirt and blouse for something a little more casual. The shirt was a breezy cotton number and the blouse was partially see-through white cotton. Anya noticed the sexy lace bra and made a mental note to get the name of it from Helen later. The boys were dressed in simple shorts and t-shirts, with flip-flops on their feet. "We could be ours. I'll ring you to collect them. Okay?" Helen directed her comment at Anya. "No problems. I have plenty to do. I'll make sure my cell is on," Anya replied, as she gave Helen a peck on the cheek. "Look after these two rogues." "Of course," she called to Anya as she shut the door behind her. "Okay, you two. Come on through," she said as she made for the back of the house. The two boys followed like ducklings. Helen led the boys to a patio area at the rear of the house. It was shaded and looked down over the pool area from a height of 3 to 4 feet. It had been designed to afford an excellent view of the whole pool area so that the adults could sit and chat, and still supervise children at play. On the house side of the patio was a large servery window through to the kitchen inside. At the corner nearest the pool, Helen had arranged a 4-seat, glass-topped table. One of the seats was out of position with a few books stacked on top. Another seat had a notepad and papers obviously placed on the table in front. The remaining 2 seats had been placed with an unencumbered view of the swimming pool. "Sit down, boys, and get comfortable. I'll go get you a drink," Helen requested as she turned and went back into the nearby kitchen. "What do you think?" she called back through the open servery. "Nice. Cool," the boys called back. Helen returned with the drinks and placed one in front of each boy. Sodas for the boys and simple ice water for herself. Seating herself, she began to explain the reason for the session. "Today's session I'll call Sex Ed 201, she started. "I think you guys have 101 covered," she added, shooting a stare at both of them. The two boys both lowered eyes at Helen's accusing glance. "Relax. I'm just pulling your leg. But not about the topic. Today is going to be all about sex education, sexual hygiene and a fair amount about male and female anatomy. How does that sound?" Helen stressed the female part. The boys seemed only mildly interested. "Oh? Hours of boring books and lectures." Helen then proceeded to launch into a lecture on female anatomy. She had all the usual material. Cross-sectional drawing of the female reproductive organs, grainy pictures of a vagina and clitoris, which raised a giggle from both boys. From the corner of her eye she could see that the boys were far more interested in her lace brassiere than the words of wisdom she was offering. "Good. Right on cue." Dawn sneaked out of her room, opened and slammed the front door, and emerged from the house onto the patio, yelling as she came. "Jenny wasn't home. Oh. Sorry. I forgot you had someone here," her voice changing from despondent to apologetic. She was a reasonable actor. "Dawn. These young men are Vladimir and Carl," Helen began. "Boys. This is my daughter, Dawn. Hi." "Hello." The boys responded meekly. Dawn must know what her mother does for a living, so what must she be thinking about them? But Vladimir would like to be called Vlad. Isn't that right? "Yes please." He really didn't like his full name. Pleasantries out of the way, Dawn got straight to the point. "Mommy, would it disturb you if I went for a swim?" "I'll try to be quiet." Helen paused for a moment, appearing to contemplate her answer. "Okay, but when you are done I want you in your room studying. And the hi-fi and TV stay off." "Okay. Thanks Mom." Dawn fired back as she danced away. She had started moving the moment she heard "okay." Helen took up a sheet of paper from the table and appeared to be reading. She sat quietly watching the boys watch Dawn as she walked to a pair of deck chairs no more than 20 feet away. She was wearing a white tank top and a short pink shirt that barely covered her ass. Stopping by the chairs she removed the tank top in one quick movement. She was standing with her side toward them so her breasts stood out in profile. She made a point of not looking up at the audience as she turned toward them and tossed the top on one of the chairs. She took a moment to rub both beasts with her hands before hooking a finger in each side of the waistband of her skirt and dropping it to her knees. Helen risked a glance at the boys from the corner of her eye. They were transfixed except to throw glances at each other to make sure neither was missing the show. Dawn stepped out of her skirt and tossed it with the tank top. She turned toward the pool, and away from the boys, and stretched her arms in the air, seemingly in a gesture of adoration of the sum. As the boys watched intently, she slipped her panties over her ass, and bending mostly from the waist, slid them down to her ankles. Her perfect pink butt cheeks shone back at the boys, who sat, now totally transfixed, staring at the now naked girl. Tossing her panties with the rest of her clothes, she walked to the end of the pool. Pausing at the edge, she turned toward them, bending one knee to dip a toe in the water. She knew the water was perfect. This was all part of the act. From their vantage point, the boys could easily see that her pussy was totally hairless. They could even see the start of the crack between her labia. Turning again to face the water, Dawn launched herself into a most elegant, arched, head-first dive. Now I think we might go back and have a quick refresher on the male reproductive organs. Helen broke the silence, and dragged the boys' attention back, kicking and screaming, to the boring books on the table. She paused just long enough to watch the boys fidget with their penises once more. She had chosen the table to give them nowhere to hide. She saw that she was watching them. She started again, pointing to the book as she rambled on about scrotums and testicles and something called a vast something or other. Meanwhile, Dawn had emerged from the water at the shallow end of the pool like a siren from a Bond movie. She pranced back to the deep end, choosing the pace most likely to get some bouncing from her tied-up breasts. Once again, she stood and paused at the deep end of the pool, this time launching herself into a forward somersault into the water. And once again the boys fidgeted with their ever-growing penises. Helen allowed the charade to continue for one more dive before she decided to put the boys out of their misery. "Oh, how cruel of me. You guys must be dying for a swim. How about we take a break and let you two cool down? Off you go. Go get wet," Helen offered in a casual, seemingly innocent tone. But, both boys stammered, glancing at each other to decide who should speak. It was Vladimir. "We didn't bring our board shorts, our swimmers." "Oh. That's okay. This is a skinny dipping only pool. In this pool everyone swims naked," Helen reassured them. "But," the boys stammered again, and as each caught Helen's eye, each of them directed her gaze to their crotch. "Oh. I see. Both of you have erections. Stop worrying. Dawn has seen plenty of naked boys in this pool and many of them had erections. Trust me, she won't bat an eyelid. Now get down there and get naked. That's an order." Slowly both boys rose and started walking to the pool, adjusting the cocks again as they went. "I have a few things to sort out here. I'll be down soon," Helen added as they departed. Picking up her notepad, she again feigned work so she could watch the boys. They stood together and both removed their shirts. That was the easy part. They could see that Dawn was watching from the far end of the pool. The boys looked at each other, having a conversation with their eyes. Who was going to be brave enough to go first? Helen was betting on Vlad. She was correct. After a pause to pluck up the courage, he stripped off his shorts and jocks in one quick movement. Seeing his brothers start to move, Carl followed along. They both stepped out of their clothes and raced to the water. Helen could see their mostly rigid members bouncing in front of them as they ran and jumped, feet first, into the water. Safe. Dawn can see us now. Helen tidied up a little, putting the books away and returning the empty soda cans to the servery. She strolled down to the pool area and over to the sauna on the far side. She slipped inside, turned the heater on low and returned to the side of the pool. "How's the water?" she asked of the group, receiving a mixed gaggle of replies. "All good." The boys watched as she moved over to the deck chairs where Dawn had stripped down. To their great surprise, Helen took the bottom of her blouse, and as Dawn had done earlier, lifted it over her head and off. The boys could now see her beautiful lace bra in all its glory. She reached behind her back, undid the clasp, and peeled the lace carefully off each tit. After she tossed the bra away, she too stood for a few seconds rubbing both beasts with her hands. Once again the boys were transfixed. As Dawn had done, Helen turned away from them as she pulled her skirt down and over her ass, bending at the waist as she pushed it to the ground. From their vantage point low in the water the boys could see all of her ass and most of her pussy. Tossing the skirt on the pile, Helen sauntered to the shallow end of the pool and slowly walked into the water. Just before her pussy disappeared she paused, leaned forward and splashed some water over her breasts. The boys watched as the water ran down and dripped from her large, dark nipples. Helen gently launched herself into the water and swam breaststroke over to the boys. They were standing side by side in shoulder-height water. Helen stopped just in front of them and stood facing both boys, her breasts easily visible just below the water surface. "What do you think?" Helen asked, trailing off at the end, leaving the question purposefully vague. Not knowing the real meaning of the question, the boys struggled for an answer. Was she asking if they liked her breasts or something else? Under the surface, Helen found the real answer to her question. She reached out and grasped each boy's penis between fingers and thumb. They were both rock hard. Finding her answer, she finished her sentence and gave the boys the opportunity to give her another answer with their voices. How do you like the skinny dipping? It's a wonderful feeling, isn't it? Yes. Yeah. The boys answered, nodding. At this moment, Dawn swam in from the side and grabbed her mother round the neck for a hug. Helen put one arm around her back to hold her close and her other hand under Dawn's ass to hold her up. With her mouth close to her mother's ear, she whispered, "How did I do?" Helen didn't answer. She just slid her lower hand further down and tickled the opening of Dawn's vagina. Getting her answer, Dawn kissed her mother on the cheek and threw herself back into water, speaking, "I love you, Mom." As Dawn swam away, Helen duck dived under the water and swam away, giving the boys a great close-up view of her ass on the way. The boys got a hint that the conversation was over for the time being and joined the others for a swim. Helen and Dawn made every attempt to let the boys get casual glimpses of tits and asses and pussies. Dawn started doing the cycle of climbing out the shallow end, prancing to the deep end and diving in. When the boys joined in, Helen noted that, despite the cool water, the boys still had rock-hard erections which bounced as they ran along. She also noted that they weren't making any attempt to cover them up. Good. They had become comfortable with their nudity, boners and all. After 5 or 10 minutes of play, Helen took up position at the side of the pool, at a depth where her breasts were completely exposed. "Okay, you lot. Over here," she shouted to all 3 children. Dawn and the boys swam over and positioned themselves in front of her. Helen couldn't help but notice that once they stopped moving, both boys had a hand under the water holding their cocks. Boys. It's their favorite toy? Once they were settled, Helen spoke. "Now the truth. When you arrived, I told you that today's session was sex ed 201. That was the truth. What I didn't tell you was that the books and photos were a total charade. Dawn didn't just happen to be here. I asked her to be here, and being the wonderful daughter she is, she agreed. Today you will learn all about female anatomy, but with real-life females. Dawn and me. What do you think about that?" Helen asked. The boys looked at each. They looked at Helen and at Dawn, and then back at each other. Nothing comprehensible came from their mouths, but she could tell from the wide, boyish grins they were delighted by the idea. "I'm after an answer. What do you think?" Helen repeated. Again they shot conversational glances at each other. Again it was Vladimir who spoke for both of them. "That would be great," he replied in a deliberate and thankful tone. "Okay. Then let's get started. You have both been staring at my breasts since you arrived. How about you come over here and have a closer look?" The boys moved in close and Helen showed them and named her nipples and areolae. She called Dawn in and explained that her breasts were still only about half size. Both of them allowed the boys to hold them and showed them how to massage them properly, how to be gentle but firm. While the boys were busy, Helen made a point of reaching down and holding the boys' cocks. She would pump each of them a few times and then let go. "You can suck them if you like. Dawnie, why don't you give the boys a little demonstration?" The boys watched on from just inches away as Dawn leant down, caressed one of her mother's beasts in her hand and latched on. Helen knew this would keep the boys aroused. As Dawn sucked, Helen warned the boys. "No biting. This is all done with your lips and tongue. And after Dawn had let go, "Come on. There are 2 nipples and 2 of you." The boys moved forward and each latched onto it. Helen cradled the back of their heads and pulled their faces into the soft flesh of her beasts. While they sucked, Dawn positioned herself against the pool wall next to her mother, who was next to speak. "Okay, now try with Dawn and feel the difference. Be gentle." The boys slid over to face Dawn, but they didn't immediately latch on. Instead they hovered there looking up at her face, seeking permission from the owner before starting. Dawn just smiled down and thrust her chest forward, and the boys latched on. Helen noted that mark of respect and smiled. While the boys were sucking, Helen moved around behind them and put an arm around each. Looking up at her daughter's face, Helen noticed something the boys would have completely missed. Dawn was in the throes of an orgasm. Once Helen saw that Dawn had come down a little, she broke the silence. "I'm getting waterlogged. How about we have the next lesson somewhere warmer? The group broke and followed Helen as she swam to the deep end of the pool. She hoisted herself out in one motion and walked briskly toward the sauna. It was only once she reached the sauna door that she made any attempt to check that the others were following. She ushered the boys inside and called back to Dawn. "Get a bunch of towels, darling." Dawn sprinted to a cupboard in a covered area next to the sauna, returning with an armful of plush, white towels. Once Dawn was inside, Helen shut the door behind herself. Dawn set to work spreading the towels on the benches inside the sauna while the boys stood to the side, not knowing how they could be useful. Now out of the water, they realized their hard-ons were very visible and they were making feeble attempts to cover them with their hands. "Boys, that is just not going to work. You both have erections and Dawn and I both know that. Now put your hands on your heads and let Dawn have a good look. That's the only way you are going to feel comfortable." Both boys reluctantly let go and did as Helen had instructed. Sure enough, both of them had rock-hard cocks, both pointing to the ceiling. Dawn moved over to them and made a formal inspection, taking each boy's member in turn between index finger and thumb. She pulled each down to horizontal and watched as each sprang back to attention, slapping against the boy's stomach. "Sweet. They are nice and stiff. But Ben's is bigger," she commented after she had inspected both. "Ben is her brother and he turns 17 soon." Helen directed to the boys. "So of course his cock will be bigger? These boys are doing okay," she directed at her daughter. Dawn already knew all that, and Helen knew that she knew. The comment was all for the boys. The boys, for their part, both noted that Dawn had both seen and touched her brother's hard cock. Dawn scurried up to one of the higher benches and sat with her back to the wall, legs together, feet dangling. Helen directed the boys to towels that Dawn had already laid out. "You two can sit here," indicating the lower bench in front of Dawn. She seated herself, side saddle, on the same bench facing them. Helen continued. "Now that we are all nice and comfy, I've got to tell you both that I have told Dawn a little bit about you. I've told her that you share a bed and that you have been sharing your bodies for a long time. She knows that you have oral sex and anal sex. Now I'm going to tell you a little about Dawn. No, better still, I'll let Dawn tell you. Dawnie? Well, okay. I had sex for the first time 2 years ago. I've had normal sex." She paused a little. Oops, sorry mom, vaginal sex. "And like you guys, I've had oral sex and anal sex with boys. I've also had lots of oral sex with other girls. Oh, and I masturbate. I have sex with myself," she added at the end, grinning. "Okay, that will probably do. So you can see, just like you, Dawn is sexually active. I'm her mother and I have no problem with this as long as she doesn't start making babies." The boys giggled. "So, we would like to have a closer look at Dawn's vagina?" Helen asked, mostly rhetorically. Me. Both boys shouted as they shot one arm in the air as if at school. "Okay, Dawn. Open up," Helen asked of her youngest. Dawn shuffled forward on the bench a little. The wall was still close enough to keep her head propped up so she could watch the boys' faces. The boys and Helen knelt on the lower bench facing her, Vlad in the middle, Helen and Carl shoulder to shoulder on either side. Dawn lifted her legs and spread them wide, resting her feet on the edge of the bench. Her labia parted and the boys got their first look at the inside of a girl's pussy. "Oh?" Vlad whispered in reverence. Carl fell back, sitting on his heels, dumbstruck. Dawn could see the wide-eyed looks on their faces. Vlad was the first to compose himself and he started with a question. "Helen, how come you have hair down there and Dawn doesn't?" It was not the first question she thought he would ask, but it was valid. Dawn waxes her pubic hair. Basically she pulls it out. If she didn't, she would have about the same amount of hair as Carl has now. "Doesn't it hurt?" Carl finally recovered and ventured a question. Dawn answered. "Yes, a little. But because I started waxing as soon as the hair started to grow, it has never got thick and tough." "Okay." Helen assumed control again. "Now let's get on with the anatomy lesson." Helen reached forward and began describing all the body parts between Dawn's legs. As she described each part she prodded and stretched Dawn's flesh, pulling back the hood to show the boys Dawn's clitoris. When she came to the vagina, Helen pushed her index finger all the way in to demonstrate that it was fairly deep. When she extracted it, the finger was covered in juice. The boys noted the casual way that Helen just licked it clean. She had done the same thing during the previous session when it was the boys' juice on her hands. "Can we touch?" Vlad asked, looking up at Helen. "Don't ask me," "It is Dawn's body. Ask her," replied in a gentle tone. "Dawn, may we touch?" Vlad asked again, this time directing his question as the correct person. Dawn looked across at Carl, who as usual had let Vlad do all the talking. The pause, and Dawn's continued stare, finally spurred him to voice. "Please," is all he uttered, and that was enough for Dawn. "Sure. Be gentle." Helen fell off to the side, allowing the boys better access to Dawn's pussy. They poked and prodded and squeezed. Vlad was particularly interested in touching the entrance to Dawn's urethra. Surprisingly, Carl was the first to dip a finger deep into Dawn's vagina. He felt around a bit inside before extracted his digit, examining the juice and sticking it in his mouth. He nodded a little and started back for another taste, only to find that Vlad was blocking the way. "There's room for two," Dawn offered. So with Vlad's fingers still exploring on one side, Carl slipped his finger in as well. Dawn was really wet, so both boys had plenty of juice to share. Meanwhile, Helen had climbed up to the bench next to Dawn and spread her legs as well. Intent on Dawn's pussy, the boys had missed her move. "What say we give Dawn a little rest and you two come and have a look at mine?" Helen offered. Helen had placed herself with her ass right on the edge of the bench. Once she saw the boys start moving, she grabbed her legs by the shins and pulled her knees up into a tuck, exposing not just her pussy but her tight pink anus as well. The boys took up new positions in front of Helen. Pulling herself into the tuck had squeezed a generous blob of juice from her vagina. The boys looked on as the juice oozed over her anus and down the crack of her ass. "It's okay. You can touch as well," Helen offered. Vlad reached out and scooped up the juice with the side of his index finger, running his knuckle up the crack and back over Helen's anus. Carl started rubbing the juice around the darker skin around the hole. Helen's ass was stretched out tight and Carl's finger was now right in the center, feeling the skin that had been pulled from inside. "Can I go inside?" he asked politely. "Sure. I trust you. You can touch me anywhere," Helen replied. Carl rolled his finger around in Helen's juice, then drove it deep inside. Vlad and Dawn looked on as the young man took his time and had a good explore inside Helen's ass. Extracting his finger, all of them saw there was a small brown stain around his fingernail. Unperturbed, he stuck it in his mouth and licked it clean. Pushing his brother aside, Vlad moistened his index finger and slid it in Helen's ass, and just as Carl had done, he licked it clean after he pulled it out. "Can I lick it?" Vlad queried, hesitantly. "Sure, and try my pussy too," Helen replied. Dawn could see that Carl was a little put out that his brother was monopolizing Helen's pussy. Dawn swung around and quickly assumed the same position as her mother. "Here, Carl. Try mine. Ben says they taste the same," Dawn offered. Carl was just an inch away from Dawn's pussy when the full extent of what she had just said sank in. He stopped and looked up at her as he spoke. "Hang on. Ben is your brother. The only way he could know that your pussies taste the same would be as if..." Carl left the shortest of pauses. Dawn finished his sentence, "He had licked both of us." "Exactly. Now stop talking and lick me." So both boys set to work licking their allotted pussy. They explored every nook and cranny. From time to time they would dive into the vagina with their fingers and explore inside. After a few minutes, Helen broke through the slurping sounds with one word: "Swap." The boys heard and obliged, pulling themselves away just long enough to trade places. Once again, the boys licked and slurped and fingered the pussy in front of them, unfazed that one was 14 and the other 40. After a few minutes, Dawn made a signal to her mother, making the motions of a blowjob on a phantom cock. Helen nodded. "Okay boys. Dawn and I need a break. If we keep our legs spread open much longer we'll crack down the middle," Helen announced. "We already have," Dawn joked, as the boys stepped back away from the bench. Their faces were smeared with pussy juice from ear to ear. As she dropped her legs and sat on the edge of the bench, she added an afterthought, "And I need to pee." "Me too." "And me," the boys both added. Helen looked at them all before finally adding ... "And me as well." "Can we watch?" Vlad asked in a cheeky voice. "Okay, here's the plan." Helen started. "We all go next door and empty out. I'm happy for the boys to watch. What about you, Dawn?" Dawn nodded and both boys grinned widely. "Then we rinse off in the pool and go hit the playroom." "What's the playroom?" Vlad begged. "You'll see," Dawn replied.